My father's hand hit my face before I finished saying no. The sound came first, a flat crack in my parents' living room, then the metallic taste. "You selfish little monster," Dad shouted. "Your sister could die because of you." Mom's fingers tightened around my arm. Claire sat 3 feet away, pale beneath the yellow light, watching me press 2 fingers against my split lip. For 38 years, my family had called me the healthy one. That afternoon, I finally understood it had never been a description. It was a job title. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and looked at my father. "Then find another donor." I walked out before any of them could answer. By midnight, my phone showed 127 missed calls. I didn't block them. I silenced the phone, turned it face down, and let every timestamp keep recording itself. Because among all the accusations, one sentence from Dad bothered me more than the rest. "You don't get to back out now." There was only one problem. I had never agreed in the first place. 4 hours earlier, I had been sitting beside Claire in a transplant clinic, still trying to convince myself my family understood the difference between being evaluated and saying yes. The examination room was too bright, the kind of white light that flattened every face. Claire sat on the paper-covered table with her hands folded loosely in her lap. She had lost weight over the past year. Her cheekbones looked sharper, and the gray cardigan hanging from her shoulders seemed too large. Mom sat beside her. Dad stood. He always stood in medical appointments, as if sitting would imply there was something happening he couldn't control. I had taken the chair closest to the door. That was an old habit I had never examined. The clinician reviewed Claire's kidney function, the current treatment plan, and the transplant evaluation process. I listened, because listening was what I did. At work, people sent me 6 versions of the same announcement and expected me to know which sentence could survive public scrutiny. At home, everyone handed me appointments, insurance questions, repair estimates, passwords, and forms because Rachel handled things. The clinician had barely finished explaining that transplant evaluation involved separate processes for recipient and potential living donors when Claire turned toward me. "They already said you're compatible enough to move forward," she said. The room went still. Claire's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I don't know why we're still pretending this is a question." My thumbnail pressed into the seam of my purse. The clinician looked from Claire to me. "Living donor decisions are handled separately," she said. "And participation is voluntary at every stage." Dad shifted his weight. Claire stared at me. She looked exhausted. That mattered. It always mattered. Her skin had the fragile, almost translucent look it took on after bad weeks, and some primitive part of me responded exactly as it had when I was 8 years old and she came home from the hospital with bruises at the bends of her arms. "Make it better. Give something. Don't be difficult." "I'm still deciding whether I'm a donor at all," I said. Claire's mouth tightened. Mom rubbed her back. Dad exhaled through his nose. "We are not starting over," he said. "Rachel already got this far." I looked at him. Something about the sentence scraped at me. Not enough to stop the conversation. Not yet. Dad had always spoken about future sacrifices as if they were scheduled appointments. When Claire needed rides, I would take her. When Mom needed help paying a deductible, I would cover it. When Dad needed someone to compare insurance letters, I would read them. When Rachel gives Claire the kidney, I had heard versions of that sentence before. Each time, I had mentally translated it into fear. That's just how Dad talks when he's scared. That explanation had worked for most of my life. The clinician redirected the conversation back to Claire's treatment, and I let her. By the time we reached the parking lot, Dad said, "Everybody come back to the house. We're settling this today." I should have gone home. Instead, I followed them. Conditioning rarely feels like obedience while you're doing it. Sometimes it feels like being reasonable one more time. At my parents' house, Mom put water on for tea nobody drank. Dad stayed standing. Claire lowered herself onto the sofa, one hand briefly braced against the cushion. I saw the movement and immediately hated myself for what I was about to say. That was the trap. Her illness made every boundary feel like an act of violence. Dad folded his arms. "Let's stop dancing around this." "I'm not dancing around anything." "You're a match. A preliminary result doesn't make me a donor." "You went through the testing." "Yes." Mom turned from the kitchen counter. Rachel, honey, nobody made you do that. The sentence landed strangely. Nobody made you. As if every family dinner for the past year had not contained some version of Claire needs you. As if Dad had not introduced me to one of his church friends in June by saying, "This is Rachel. She's going to save her sister again." I had laughed then. Actually laughed. I wished I could go back and ask that version of myself what, exactly, she thought was funny. Claire spoke from the sofa. "So, all those tests meant nothing?" I looked at her. "No. They meant I agreed to be evaluated. And now?" The tea kettle clicked softly behind Mom. I heard my own breathing. "Now, I'm saying I'm not donating my kidney." Mom crossed the room immediately. "Rachel." Her fingers closed around my forearm. Not painfully. That almost made it worse. It was the same grip she had used when I was a child before blood draws, the same pressure that meant stay still and don't embarrass us. "The healthy one carries what the sick one can't," she said. There it was. Our family gospel. Dad had said it when I missed a school trip because Claire was hospitalized. Mom had said it when I took unpaid leave to drive Claire to appointments. I had said versions of it to myself every time my savings account dropped because somebody else's crisis mattered more than whatever I had been saving for. Claire stared at me. "You know what dialysis is doing to me?" "Yes." "You know what my life looks like right now?" "Yes." "And you can still say no?" The question hurt because I could hear the answer my family had trained into me. No decent sister could. No loving daughter would. No healthy person should. I pulled my arm from Mom's hand. "Yes." Dad moved before I understood he was moving. The slap snapped my head sideways. For 1 second, the room lost its edges. My tongue touched the inside of my lip. Metal. Warmth. Silence. Claire whispered, "Dad." Mom said his name too, but she didn't come toward me. Dad's face had gone red. "You selfish little monster," he said. "Your sister could die because of you." I looked at Mom. Some stupid, stubborn part of me was still waiting. "Are you okay?" Instead, she said, "Look what this is doing to your father." That was the moment. Not the slap. Not Claire's accusation. That sentence. My lip was bleeding, and somehow I was still the person expected to manage everyone else's feelings. I wiped my mouth, then find another donor. Dad pointed at me. "You don't get to back out now." I picked up my purse. "Watch me." The family memory box sat on the console beside the front door. Mom had kept it there for years, full of birthday cards, hospital bracelets, school pictures, and things she called proof that we had survived together. The lid wasn't fully closed. A faded pediatric wristband stuck out from beneath it. My name was barely visible. Rachel Mercier. I stopped for half a second. Then I opened the door and left. Urgent care smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. The woman at check-in handed me a tablet. I answered the questions automatically until I reached emergency contact. Martin Mercer. Dad. My finger hovered over the screen. I could have deleted him then. I didn't. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. A nurse cleaned the cut and documented the swelling. Talking stretched the injured part of my lip, so I answered in short sentences. When she asked what had happened, I said my father had hit me. The words sounded too formal for something that had happened beside my mother's tea kettle. Domestic violence belonged to television commercials and pamphlets in waiting rooms, not to a 67-year-old retired athletic director who volunteered at food drives. Not to my father. My phone buzzed again on the chair beside me. Then again. I turned it face down. Nina called 20 minutes later. I answered because she was the only person whose name on the screen did not make my shoulders rise. "You missed the 4:30 check-in," she said. Her tone was careful. "I know. Are you hurt?" My throat tightened. It was the first time anyone had asked. "Yes." A pause. "Do you need company, a ride, or space?" My reflex was immediate. Space. The word came out before I thought about it. I closed my eyes. For most of my life, needing nothing had been the easiest way to keep people comfortable. "Nina, I'm here. Actually, meet me here." "Okay. I need to file a police report." Another pause. No gasp. No speech about what I should do. "Send me the address." That was all. After urgent care, Nina drove behind me to the police station Because I refused to leave my car there overnight. At the desk, I heard myself give my father's name, my parents' address, and a plain description of what had happened. I told him I would not donate a kidney to my sister, I said. He hit me. The officer asked who else had been present. My mother, my sister. He asked where I had been treated. I gave him the urgent care information. He asked about messages. I looked down at my phone. 43 missed calls. I have some. By the time I finished, I had an incident number written on a piece of paper. The officer explained that I could ask about protective options and safety planning. He also made one point very clear. Making a report created a record, but I did not control every decision that might follow if investigators or prosecutors believed an offense had occurred. That made my stomach twist. A ridiculous part of me had imagined filing a report like placing a document in a drawer. Proof, not consequence. I'm not asking anyone to arrest him tonight, I said. The officer's expression stayed neutral. You can tell us what you want and what you're afraid of. Charging decisions aren't entirely yours. I nodded. For 38 years, my family had treated every crisis like something I was responsible for solving. Now, even refusing to protect Dad from consequences felt like another decision I was making against him. I didn't ask for a civil protection order that night. I told myself I wanted to see whether the report alone made him understand how far he had gone. That was the last piece of hope I still hadn't cut loose. When I reached my condo, my phone had 76 missed calls. I put it on Do Not Disturb. I did not block the numbers. Not because I wanted to read the messages. Because I wanted the timestamps. At work, when a public controversy erupted, I never relied on somebody saying, there were tons of complaints. I counted. I sourced. I preserved originals. That night, for the first time, I treated my family the way I treated a communications crisis. I created a folder. August 13th. Calls. Voicemails. Texts. Originals. No adjectives. No, Dad, being insane. No, Mom guilting me. Just sources. Martin. Call me immediately. Diane. Please stop doing this to Claire. Claire. I can't believe you're making everything worse because you're angry at Dad. Not one message asked whether my lip needed stitches. Then I remembered Dad still had the spare key to my condo. Years ago, I had given it to him for emergencies. Of course I had. In my family, emergency had always been the word that opened every door. He had also known the guest alarm code once. I called the emergency locksmith number, posted by my condo association. Before midnight, the lock had been rekeyed, the old guest code deleted, and a new code entered that nobody in my family knew. I sent one email. The spare key and prior alarm code no longer authorize entry to my home. Do not come to my residence without my written invitation. No explanation. No debate. Then I set the phone back on the counter. At midnight, the screen showed 127 missed calls. The next morning, my lip had swollen enough that speaking pulled at the cut. I emailed Nina before 7. I'm working remote today. Move the recorded remarks. You can read the approved copy. I'll handle final wording and written questions. Her reply came 2 minutes later. Done. No questions. No drama. My father had hit the part of me I used for a living. The irony was almost funny. Almost. At 10, I had a private appointment with the donor advocate attached to Claire's transplant program. No Mom. No Dad. No Claire. Just me. The advocate explained again that living donation was voluntary and that I could stop the process at any time. If I wanted privacy, the program did not need to give my family a detailed reason for why I was no longer moving forward. So they don't have to know I said no? I asked. You control what you tell them about your decision. What if my father calls? We do not give your donor records to family members or the recipient simply because they ask. What if Claire calls? Same answer. I looked at my hands. There it was. An exit. A clean one. The hospital could become the villain for me. I could let my parents believe some test had disqualified me. I could keep the kidney and maybe keep a little of their approval. For several seconds, I wanted that more than I wanted to admit. Then I heard Dad again. You don't get to back out now. No, I said. The advocate waited. I don't want a medical reason invented for me. I want my record to reflect that I withdrew voluntarily. You're sure? My fingers were trembling against my knee. Yes. I revoked any unnecessary family authorization and requested that all donor communication come directly to me through the secure portal. Then I completed the withdrawal. The confirmation arrived before lunch. I read it twice. Not because it was complicated, because nobody had translated my decision into a family-friendly version. I withdrew. Voluntarily. Me. That afternoon, I opened my banking app. For 7 years, I had sent my parents $600 each month toward the gap between their mortgage payment and the amount Dad and Mom said they could comfortably manage. I also covered part of their car insurance, the family cell plan, occasional utility shortfalls, repairs that somehow became mine because I was the one who had a real salary. Dad had a pension and Social Security. Mom had Social Security and seasonal bookkeeping income. They were not destitute. My money had allowed them to avoid changing a lifestyle built when Dad was still working full-time. I had told myself I was helping because Claire's illness had stretched everybody thin. Maybe that had been true once. But my card was still attached to bills years later. I removed it. Not their accounts. My payment method. Then I sent one email listing the next billing date so nobody could claim I had deliberately caused a lapse without notice. I will no longer pay these household expenses after the current cycle. Please update each account with your own payment method. I added one more paragraph. Claire's health insurance, medications, dialysis-related care, transplant evaluation, and hospital expenses are not being paid through my accounts and are not affected by this decision. Future requests for financial assistance must be made in writing. Mom answered first. Rachel, this is not the time to make emotional financial decisions. Dad replied 3 minutes later. So now you're taking the house down with your sister. I read the sentence slowly. Kidney, mortgage, cellphone, insurance, utilities, different things. Same category in his mind. Things Rachel had. Things family needed. Therefore, things family was entitled to. My phone flashed with a voicemail notification from Aunt Teresa. I almost ignored it. Then I remembered what she had said the night before. Your dad said the surgery was basically set. I called her. Aunt Teresa? Oh, honey. Her voice softened. I don't want to get in the middle. I'm not asking you to. A phrase I used at work surfaced automatically. Can you forward me exactly what Dad sent you? Not a screenshot. The original email. Silence. Why? Because I want to know what he actually said. A few minutes later, the email arrived. I opened the original. From Martin Mercer. Subject: Claire update. I skimmed until one sentence stopped me. Rachel has agreed to be Claire's donor, and we're moving toward surgery. My eyes went to the date. Then, I opened the secure donor portal. I checked the date of my private donor consent appointment. I checked the earlier compatibility steps. I checked when I had first formally told the program I was still deciding whether to proceed. Dad's email came before a milestone that made his wording impossible to dismiss as simple shorthand. I remembered hearing him tell people, when Rachel gives Claire the kidney. I had noticed it. Of course I had. I just hadn't let myself call it what it was. Every time, I had corrected his words inside my own head. He's scared. He means if. He assumes too much. He doesn't understand the process. I had been doing version control for my father without realizing it, editing his certainty into something kinder so I could keep loving him. I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed what I said. Then beside it, what they said, I said. Under the second heading, I pasted Dad's exact sentence. Under the first, I entered what my donor record actually showed on that date. I stared at the 2 columns. For the first time since he hit me, the room felt completely quiet. Dad had not simply misunderstood my decision after I said no. He had announced my yes before I had one. He had announced my yes before I had one. The sentence stayed on my screen long after the rest of Dad's email blurred around it. 2 mornings later, I was back at my desk at the Central Library with concealer failing to hide the yellowing bruise near my mouth and a thin line along my lower lip that pulled every time I pronounced a word with too much force. Talking hurt less than it had on the first day. It still hurt enough to remind me. At 9, Nina stood in the doorway holding a printed press release. "We sent the wrong paragraph to the radio stations," she said. "That problem, at least, knew how to behave." "Which version?" "Looks like Tuesday's." There were 2 Tuesday drafts. Nina dropped into the chair across from me. Of course there were. My mouth almost formed a smile. It tugged at the cut, so I stopped. The release concerned renovations at one of our branches. Nothing dramatic. One draft said the children's section would remain open. A later inspection had changed the schedule, and the final version said it would close temporarily. Someone had attached the older file to the distribution email. 10 minutes later, the sequence was clean. Original draft. Revision. Approval. Wrong attachment. Distribution list. Correction. No one needed to be evil for a bad version to spread. Someone only had to send it once, and everyone downstream could repeat it honestly. That thought made my fingers stop over the keyboard. On my second monitor sat the document I had started at home. What I said. What they said, I said. Nina followed my eyes. "You're doing version control on your dad." "I'm trying to figure out whether there are versions." "There are. Knowing that and proving it aren't the same thing." She nodded toward my screen. "That sounds like something you say at work." "It is." My office phone rang. Nina glanced at it. "Want me to get that?" "No." The caller was from the County Victim Services Office. My stomach tightened before I answered. The woman identified herself, confirmed the police report number from the night Dad hit me, and explained why she was calling. The investigation had moved forward. A misdemeanor domestic violence complaint had been filed, and Dad had been ordered to appear for arraignment. For several seconds, the only sound in my office was the ventilation system. "So what happens now?" I asked. She explained the part that mattered to me. If he was released pending the case, the court could impose conditions. I would receive notice of anything that affected contact or safety. "You don't have to communicate with him about the case," she said. "I'm not trying to decide what happens to him." "I understand." That was easy for her to say. Nothing about it felt easy from my side of the desk. When I made the report, some irrational part of me had still imagined Dad getting a stern phone call, realizing what he had done, and becoming my father again before the machinery moved any farther. Instead, there was now a case caption with the state on one side and his name on the other. I had not created the rules governing what happened next. I had only stopped hiding the fact that he had hit me. The distinction mattered. It did not make my hands any warmer. By the end of the week, another notice arrived through the Victim Services channel. Dad had been released under conditions that included no direct contact with me and instructions to stay away from my condo and workplace. I read the notice 3 times. Then I saved it in the same dated folder as the urgent care record, the police incident number, and the call log from that first night. Nina stood near my desk while I renamed the file. "You okay?" The question caught me off guard, even though she had asked some version of it every day. "No," I said. Then, after a moment, "But I know what happened." That was becoming almost as important. Dad stopped appearing directly on my phone. The pressure did not stop. It changed senders. A cousin I had not spoken to since Christmas wrote, "I heard you backed out at the last minute. I'm not judging, but Claire must be terrified." A woman from my parents' church emailed my work address because she said she did not have my personal one. "Your father told us you were going to donate. Everyone has been praying for both of you. I hope this can still be repaired." Then Aunt Teresa forwarded a message from another relative with almost the same phrase. "Backed out at the last minute." I stared at those words. 3 people. 3 different conversations. Same construction. People rarely invent identical summaries independently. Someone gives them language. The next morning, I asked Nina to help me with exactly one thing. If anything personal about this comes through a library account, nobody argues with the sender. Okay. Nobody defends me either. Her eyebrows lifted. "Just preserve it and route it to me." "You sure?" "Yes." The urge to have my coworkers correct strangers on my behalf was almost physical. So was the urge to write each relative a detailed explanation of living donor consent, preliminary testing, privacy, pressure, and 38 years of history. Instead, I wrote one sentence to Aunt Teresa. "Can you forward the original message where you first heard I had agreed?" Then I sent similar requests to 2 other people. Originals. Not screenshots. Not summaries. What came back over the next several days was worse than one lie. It was an edit history. The earliest message was relatively accurate. Rachel is being evaluated. A later one said, early results look promising. Then, Rachel looks like the donor. Then, Rachel has agreed to donate. After I refused. Rachel backed out at the last minute. I placed each sentence beside its date. My donor records sat open on the other screen. The first time Dad wrote that I had agreed was before my private donor advocate appointment, the meeting where someone finally sat across from me without Claire, Mom, or Dad in the room and asked whether I actually wanted to continue. Before anyone had asked me privately, my father had already answered publicly. A memory surfaced with embarrassing clarity. We had been at my parents' kitchen table a few weeks after my preliminary results. Dad was talking about Thanksgiving. When you donate, we'll probably have to do something small this year. If I donate, I had corrected. He waved one hand. Same difference. No, it isn't. Claire had been sitting across from me. Her face changed at the word if. Not dramatically. Just enough. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I remembered seeing that, and immediately softening. I'm just saying there are more steps. Dad smiled, as though I had returned to the approved script. That's my girl. At the time, letting it go had felt kind. Now I looked at his messages and understood what my kindness had purchased. Each time I corrected him privately and then allowed the public sentence to stand, his wording got harder. Possibility became likelihood. Likelihood became plan. Plan became promise. Promise became debt. A notification opened in the corner of my screen. Auto insurance payment method required. That took me somewhere else. 7 years earlier, Dad's SUV had needed a transmission repair. The same month Claire was going through another brutal stretch of appointments. Mom had called me from the repair shop. We're just squeezed right now. I had paid it. A month later, Claire attended a 2-hour charity event benefiting patients with chronic illness. Mom posted 6 photos. My beautiful, brave daughter still giving back no matter what life throws at her. No one posted a photo of the transmission invoice. Another memory followed. A cabin weekend I had booked with 2 friends in Hocking Hills. Friday morning, Claire's ride to an appointment fell through. Mom had said, "It's only a weekend." Dad added, "You're the healthy one. You can reschedule." So I did. The third memory was quieter. 2 years ago, I had asked Mom if I could reduce the $600 monthly transfer for a while. My employer had increased the retirement match, and I wanted to contribute more. She had been doing bookkeeping at the kitchen table. Without even looking up from her calculator, she said, "Claire's treatment isn't something we can schedule around your savings." I had apologized. That was the detail that embarrassed me now. Not that I had asked, that I had apologized for asking. I opened 7 years of transfers. Housing support, insurance, repairs, utility gaps, phone plan. The total landed somewhere between $75,000 and $80,000, depending on what I counted. For a while, I stared at it as if the number belonged to someone else. Dad had a pension. Both of my parents received Social Security. Mom still earned some money doing seasonal bookkeeping. My $600 a month had not stood between them and starvation. It had stood between them and adjustment. A smaller phone plan. Fewer restaurant dinners. Maybe 1 car instead of 2. Maybe using their own savings when the furnace needed work. My money had not saved their lives. It had saved their preferences. The healthy one carries what the sick one can't. For years I had thought sick meant Claire. Looking at those transfers, I realized the sentence had expanded until everyone except me qualified to put something down. That afternoon, I called my sister. Claire answered on the 5th ring. "Hi." Her voice sounded tired. Guilt arrived right on schedule. "How are you feeling?" "Not great." For several seconds, the old conversation tried to take over. How was dialysis going? Did she need groceries? Had Mom gotten her prescriptions? Was somebody driving her next week? Instead, I looked at the chronology on my desk. "Claire, I need you to answer one question." A pause. "Okay. Did I ever tell you I had agreed to donate my kidney?" "Dad said you were compatible." "That wasn't my question." Her breathing changed. "Rachel, come on. Did I tell you yes?" You did all the testing. So, what was I supposed to think? That I was being tested. You always do this. Do what? Turn everything into exact words when you know what people mean. The sentence hit harder than I expected. Exact words. At work, exact words were how we kept public notices from sending people to closed buildings. At home, exact words had apparently become cruelty. Was there ever a surgery date? I asked. You know how sick I am. Yes. Then why are you interrogating me about a date? Because people are saying I canceled something that never existed. You changed your mind. No. I made up my mind. Claire went quiet. Anger moved through me, slow and unfamiliar. My whole life I had protected her from anger because illness had already taken so much from her. As if being sick meant no one was ever allowed to ask what she chose to do with the power everyone handed her. You thought I would donate, because I always do what's needed, I said. That's not fair. It's what you just said. I thought you loved me. The words went straight through every defense I had. For 1 second, I was 8 years old again, sitting under white hospital lights while Mom called me brave. Then the present came back. My desk. My laptop. My name at the top of my own medical records. I do love you. Claire's voice broke slightly. Then I don't understand you. You don't have to understand me today. She exhaled. After a moment, she said, Mom still has your bracelet. What bracelet? You know which one. From when we were kids. The hospital one. She keeps it in that box. The memory box by the front door. The faded strip with my name on it. Why are you telling me that? I don't know. That answer sounded more honest than anything else she had said. We ended the call without resolving a single thing. But one belief did not survive it. Claire was not merely standing inside a story Dad had created. She was using parts of it too. The following Monday brought the first billing cycle after I removed my payment methods. Mom emailed before 8 in the morning. Her subject line was simply bills. Attached was a list. Mortgage shortfall, car insurance, cell service, a utility payment. She had marked the entries that had previously come from me. No confusion. No missing arithmetic. Of course not. Mom had spent years doing bookkeeping. She knew exactly what my money covered. Her note ended with, Your father calls this punishing a sick family. I hope when you calm down, you'll see that. Dad's name in the sentence made my pulse jump. Then I stopped myself. Mom had written the email. I had no source proving he had instructed her to send that message. So that was how I logged it. Source. Diane Mercer. Claim. Diane says Martin calls financial withdrawal punishment. No embellishment. No assumption. A separate message came from Claire an hour later. Did you cancel the grocery delivery membership too? Seriously? This is the week I have 3 appointments. I read it twice. Her health insurance was intact. Her medications were intact. Her treatment was intact. What had disappeared was a convenience I had been paying for. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. There were 10 different answers I wanted to send. Only one mattered. Yes. That subscription was paid with my card. I'm not renewing it. Mom's email got an equally short reply. These accounts are yours. My payment method will not be reinstated. Then I closed my inbox. That afternoon, Aunt Teresa forwarded one more old email. I forgot about this one, she wrote. Dad had sent it weeks before the donor process became serious. He called me the obvious donor. He told relatives not to worry. Rachel always comes through. My chest tightened. Farther down, beneath a paragraph about Claire being scared, was another sentence. Once she sees how scared Claire is, Rachel won't say no. I read it once. Then again. No medical terminology. No misunderstanding about compatibility. No confusion over process. Dad had not predicted my decision. He had predicted the pressure that would control it. I attached the email to my chronology, booked a consultation with an attorney named Elena Ruiz for the following week, and sent her only the timeline and source documents. No childhood history. No speech about what kind of father Martin Mercer had been. Facts first. When the appointment confirmation arrived, I looked back at Dad's sentence one last time. Once she sees how scared Claire is, Rachel won't say no. For 38 years, fear had been the family language I translated fastest. Now I finally knew who had been using it to speak in my name. The sentence from Dad's email stayed with me all weekend. Once she sees how scared Claire is, Rachel won't say no. By Monday morning, I had read it enough times that the words no longer felt like a threat. They felt like an instruction manual. Not for me. For him. The conference room at Elena Ruiz's office was smaller than I expected. No dark wood, no dramatic shelves of law books, no person waiting to tell me exactly what justice should look like. Just a square table, 2 legal pads, a pitcher of water, and a window facing a parking garage. That helped. Elena opened the chronology I had emailed her and turned the first page toward herself. You built this? Yes. Original sources? Where I could get them? Screenshots? Only when that was the only format available. Original emails are attached separately. Call logs are exported from my account. Medical records are mine. She looked at me for a moment. What do you do again? Communications. That explains the footnotes. Despite myself, I smiled. The cut on my lip pulled. The smile disappeared. Elena noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, she moved through the documents in order. Urgent care record. Police incident report. The messages from that first night. The notice I had sent after rekeying my condo. The criminal case notice. Dad's release conditions prohibiting direct contact and requiring him to stay away from my home and workplace. Then the emails. Rachel is being evaluated. Rachel looks like the donor. Rachel has agreed. Rachel backed out at the last minute. Elena tapped the final sentence with one finger. This is important emotionally, she said, but I need you to separate something for me. Okay. What happened to you over 38 years and what can be established in a legal proceeding are not always the same thing. My shoulders tightened before I could stop them. She saw it. I'm not saying the rest didn't happen. I know. Do you? That irritated me more than it should have, maybe because the answer was no. For most of my life, if someone separated what happened from what could be proven, I heard the second half as a denial of the first. Elena turned another page. The assault is documented. The continued unwanted contact is documented. Your father's statements about your donor decision have identifiable sources. The criminal court has already imposed release conditions. If you want additional civil protection built around access, we can talk about that. What about Claire's records? We don't need them. I don't want them. Good. My sister's diagnosis isn't evidence against my father. No. Her kidney function isn't mine to expose. No. The answer came easily from Elena. That mattered. My parents had spent years treating Claire's medical life as communal property. Every lab result became dinner conversation. Every appointment became a household event. Every crisis became a reason normal rules no longer applied. I had no intention of using Claire's privacy simply because she had benefited from mine being ignored. Elena closed the folder. What do you want? To stop him. That's broad. To stop him from deciding he gets access to me whenever he thinks his reason is important enough. She waited. The fluorescent light above us made a faint electrical hum. What if he never admits he was wrong? She asked. The question landed harder than anything else she had said. Somewhere under the police report, the emails, the donor withdrawal, and the locks I had changed, there was still a child waiting for Dad to look at her and say, I should not have done that. Not I was scared. Not Claire was sick. Not you pushed me too far. Just wrong. I don't know, I said. Elena nodded once. Figure that out before you make your outcome depend on it. 3 days later, a box arrived at my condo. No return address was necessary. I recognized Mom's handwriting on the label. The package was light enough to hold in one hand. For several minutes, it sat unopened on my kitchen counter while I made coffee I did not drink. The police release conditions applied to Dad, not Mom. She could contact me. Nothing about that made opening the box mandatory. Still, I did. Inside was tissue paper, a folded note, and a plastic hospital bracelet yellowed with age. My name had faded but was still legible. Achel Mercé. My stomach tightened before my mind caught up. The bracelet from the memory box. Mom's note was short. You saved her once. We were proud of you. Dad is willing to apologize. We can stop all of this before it gets worse. Drop the case, come home, And at least talk to the donor team again. Nobody is asking you to decide that day. We just want our family back. My thumb brushed the brittle edge of the bracelet. We were proud of you. There it was. The tiny thing I had wanted for so long that I had stopped admitting I wanted it. Pride. Not gratitude for paying a bill. Not relief that I had handled another appointment. Not Rachel is the strong one. Proud of me. My phone was already in my hand before I realized I had picked it up. Mom's name waited in my contacts. I could call. Tell her I would meet somewhere neutral. Tell her the legal case could wait. Hear Dad say he was sorry. Maybe sit in one room together without a doctor, officer, or attorney. The fantasy formed quickly because I had practiced it for decades. Then my eyes moved from the bracelet to a folder on the counter. My current donor paperwork. A white page with my name, my privacy notice, and a line where an adult patient or donor candidate made her own decisions. I placed the old bracelet beside it. One object had been wrapped around the wrist of a child who had been praised for being brave, while adults decided what bravery required. The other had a signature line. Mine. Mom's note said, "You saved her once." It did not say, "We should have protected you too." The phone went back on the counter. No call. No meeting. No promise to start over. I folded the note, placed it with the box, and left both where they were until I could decide what they belonged to now. Claire called the next morning. Her voice sounded thin. "I have an appointment Thursday." I waited. Nephrology follow-up. "Okay, would you come?" Every muscle between my shoulders tightened. "Why?" "Because I want you to hear it from them." Hear what? What waiting actually means. The answer was honest enough to make me uneasy. "You want me to understand how sick you are." "Yes. I already understand you're sick." "You understand it as information." That sounds like something Dad would say. Dad isn't coming. Neither was Mom. That was what changed my answer. "One appointment," I said. Claire exhaled. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Thursday afternoon, I sat in another medical room under another set of lights. This time I chose the chair farthest from the door. The decision was so small, nobody else noticed. Claire wore a navy sweater and no makeup. Her hands looked dry, the skin around her knuckles slightly gray. Nothing about her illness needed exaggeration. Sitting beside her was enough. The clinician reviewed lab trends, treatment burden, symptoms, and the uncertainty of waiting for transplant. I listened, not because Claire had tricked me into caring, because I cared. That was what made every boundary harder. At one point, Claire turned toward the clinician. "Can you tell her what waiting means for me?" The room shifted. The clinician looked at Claire first, then at me. "We can talk about your treatment and prognosis," she said. "Living donor decisions are handled separately. I'm not going to pressure another person about donation during your visit." Claire's mouth tightened. "I'm not asking you to pressure her." "You asked her to come hear what waiting means," I said. Claire turned toward me. "So? So I'm here. Then listen. I have been." The clinician glanced between us but did not intervene. Good. This was not her conversation to solve. Claire's fingers twisted together. "You get to leave here." The words came quietly. "You get to walk out and go back to your apartment and your job. You don't have machines deciding how your week works. You don't schedule your life around lab numbers. No. You can sit there healthy and say no because you know you get to leave." The old guilt rose so fast I almost mistook it for truth. Then another thought followed. My health did not make my consent less valuable. "I understand that you're sick," I said. "My answer is still no." Claire stared at me. The clinician lowered her eyes to the chart, giving us privacy without pretending she had disappeared. "One question had been waiting since our last call. Did you know there was never a surgery date?" Claire's face changed. "Not much." Her gaze dropped to her hands. "That's what you came here to ask me?" "No, you asked me here. I'm asking now." Dad thought. "Did you know?" A long breath left her. "Yes." The word barely carried across the room. My jaw tightened. "How long?" "I knew nothing was final." "Did you correct anyone who said I had agreed?" "No." "Why?" Claire rubbed one thumb over the other. "Because I thought you would." "That wasn't my question." Her head came up. "Because every time somebody said you were going to do it, I could breathe for 5 minutes." There was no theatrical confession. No smirk. No secret mastermind. Just my sister telling me that a lie about my body had made her less afraid, so she had allowed it to live. You knew they were saying I changed my mind. Yes. And you knew I had never made the promise they said I broke. Her lips pressed together. Yes. The answer hurt more than I expected because part of me had still kept Claire in a separate category. Dad controlled. Mom enabled. Claire suffered. Simple. Suffering was easier to forgive when I treated it as innocence. I didn't tell Dad to hit you, she said. I know. I would never do that. I know. Then why are you looking at me like that? Because you didn't have to order the worst thing that happened to benefit from everything around it. Claire flinched. Regret followed immediately. Not because the statement was false. Because some part of me still believed anger at Claire required instant repair. I did not repair it. Her eyes went back to the floor. After a while, she said, Dad thinks you'll come back if I get worse. The room seemed to narrow. What? He said you always do. I remembered Dad's email. Once she sees how scared Claire is, Rachel won't say no. 2 separate sources. Same mechanism. Claire looked at me. I'm not saying he's right. You don't need to. The appointment ended 20 minutes later. Outside, Claire asked whether I would get coffee. No. Her face closed. I came to the appointment. I know. That doesn't mean I have the rest of the afternoon. She looked as though she wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded. Driving home, I realized it was the first time I had been near Claire's medical crisis and left before everyone else decided I was done. Saturday arrived with nothing on my calendar. Nothing. No appointment. No insurance call. No grocery run. No trip to my parents' house. At 8 in the morning, my body behaved as if I had forgotten something. The phone came off the nightstand. No emergency messages. At 9, I checked again. Nothing. By 10, the quiet felt suspicious. That was when I understood how much of my nervous system had been trained around anticipation. Someone would need me. Therefore, rest was merely the time before the next request. I opened my bank account. The first monthly transfer to my parents had not gone out. $600 remained where it had always started. For years, that number had already belonged to somebody else before I earned it. I increased my retirement contribution back to the percentage I had wanted 2 years earlier. The confirmation page looked almost offensively ordinary. No victory music. No screaming relatives. Just money from my paycheck staying attached to my future. Next came the preventive appointment I had postponed twice because Claire had needed transportation on the same week. I scheduled it. Then I bought 1 ticket to an author event at the downtown branch for the following Saturday. The event cost $18. I had spent more than that on parking during Claire's hospital weeks. Still, clicking buy made my throat tighten. It was not the money. It was putting something unnecessary on my calendar simply because I wanted to be there. Later that afternoon, the old hospital bracelet was still on my kitchen counter. A clean envelope came from my desk drawer. On the front, I wrote my full name, Rachel Mercer. Inside went the bracelet. Then the envelope went into my personal medical file. Not Claire's folder. Not Mom's memory box. Mine. That was when Elena's question finally had an answer. What if he never admits he was wrong? Distance. I wanted distance that did not disappear the next time someone became frightened. On Monday, I called Elena. I know what I want. She waited. I want something enforceable. The criminal case was already moving without my permission or management. Dad's release conditions prohibited direct contact and required him to stay away from my condo and workplace. But the pressure had simply changed shape. Mom called. Claire called. Relatives forwarded messages. Everything still arrived dressed as emergency, duty, or concern. The state's case could address what Dad had done. It could not define every boundary I needed going forward. So, I decided to ask the civil court for one. Elena walked me through the forms. She did not dictate my statement. Every sentence came from my chronology. When a draft said Martin had organized relatives to pressure me, I stopped. Source? Elena looked at the sentence. You have multiple relatives repeating his wording. That proves spread. Not that he personally instructed every call. Fair. We changed it. When another sentence implied Claire's treatment gave Dad a motive to escalate, I removed her medical details entirely. If I can't source it, It doesn't go in, I said. Elena gave a small nod. That rule will save you from a lot of bad decisions. The petition focused on what I could establish. The assault, the same-day report, the call pattern, the no-contact release conditions, the messages and indirect pressure, my condo notice, the workplace risk. I asked for no direct or indirect contact from Dad, distance from my home and workplace, and one written route through which genuine emergency information about Claire could reach me without turning into a command. The court granted temporary ex parte protection and set a full hearing. Once I had the order, I sent the relevant information to the library's human resources and workplace safety team myself. Central Library was public space. Dad could not be magically erased from every floor because I was uncomfortable. So the plan was specific. No staff member would disclose my schedule. No one would call me down to meet him. He was not authorized to enter the administrative suite or cross staff-only doors looking for me. The safety office sent formal notice explaining the restricted area and the workplace boundary. That mattered to me, not because paper was magic, because ambiguity had always been Dad's favorite place to stand. A week before the hearing, Elena called. Martin's attorney requested a continuance. I leaned back in my desk chair. For what? Time to prepare. Will they get it? They may. The temporary order remains in effect. The old part of me heard delay and translated it into danger. More time for Dad to talk. More time for Mom to guilt me. More time for Claire to get worse. What do we do? Elena's answer was simple. We follow the order that already exists. After the call, I looked at the new hearing date. Several more weeks. For years, I had imagined boundaries as something that became real only after somebody stronger agreed to enforce them. A judge, a doctor, a father. Now I had to live inside one before the final hearing ever happened. That was harder. It was also the point. Claire went into the hospital 4 days later. Mom's message arrived through the emergency channel just after 6 in the evening. Claire is in the hospital. Whatever this is, come now. My body moved before my thoughts did. Keys, coat, shoes, purse. The route to the hospital assembled in my head automatically. 22 minutes if traffic was light. The elevator was 3 steps from my front door when I stopped. My fingers were wrapped around the handle. For several seconds, I could hear Dad's old sentence as clearly as if he were behind me. The healthy one carries what the sick one can't. I went back inside. Not because I did not care. Because caring had become the easiest way to erase me. Claire's name appeared in my phone. I called her directly. She answered after several rings. Her voice was weak but recognizable. Hey, are you okay? They're keeping me overnight. What happened? She told me enough to understand she was being treated and monitored. No one needed a kidney from me that night. No one needed me to negotiate with a doctor, drive a car, or sign a form. You coming? She asked. My hand tightened around the phone. I'm glad you're being cared for. That's not what I asked. I know. A long pause. My donor decision has not changed. Claire breathed out. Of course that's what you say right now. I'm not discussing donation while you're in the hospital. So you're not coming? No. Her voice went flat. Okay. The call ended. The guilt came after. Not gradually. All at once. It sat in my chest so heavily that staying home felt less like a boundary than a physical act of resistance. Nina came over with takeout after I told her Claire had been admitted. She did not say I had done the right thing. Thank God. If she had, I might have argued with her just to prove how terrible I felt. Instead, she opened containers on my kitchen counter and asked whether I wanted company. Yes. So she stayed. We ate without talking much. At 8:30, my phone lit up with another message from Mom. I read it once. Then again. I told your father not to go to your office. He said he'll handle this himself. Nina saw my face. What? I turned the phone toward her but did not hand it over. There were a dozen ways to interpret Mom's sentence. Warning. Manipulation. Exaggeration. A message Dad had actually said. A message she wanted me to believe, he said. Guessing was how people got trapped inside stories they could not prove. So I did not guess. The message went into the folder exactly as received. Then I forwarded it to Elena and the workplace safety contact. No added theory. No prediction. Just source, date, wording. Dad had spent most of my life assuming fear would make me move toward him. This time, fear made me document where I was standing. The warning reached the safety office before my father did. That was the only reason the first call from reception didn't send me running downstairs. I was halfway through a meeting about winter programming when Nina appeared in the glass doorway and lifted one finger. Not urgent enough to interrupt me aloud. Urgent enough that she wanted my attention. The room held 6 department managers, 2 laptops, and a draft calendar projected onto the wall. Normally, I would have finished the sentence before looking away. That morning, something in Nina's face stopped me. "Give me a minute," I said. Nobody asked why. Outside the conference room, Nina kept her voice low. "Your father is here." Every muscle in my back locked at once. "Where?" Reception called first. They told him they couldn't give out your schedule. "Is he still in the lobby?" Nina hesitated. "That's why I came up." The public part of the central library had always complicated this boundary. Dad was allowed to walk through the same front doors as anyone else. The order did not turn an entire government building into private property because I worked there. But the administrative suite was different. The safety office had sent formal written notice after the temporary order. My schedule was not to be disclosed. He was not authorized to enter employee-only areas looking for me. The doors carried signs large enough that nobody could mistake them. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Security says he followed someone through the staff door." My mouth went dry. Was he told to stop? Yes. By who? Reception first, then Kevin from facilities. "Security is on the way." A vibration came from my pocket. Dad's number should not have been reaching me at all. It wasn't. The message came from an unfamiliar number. "Claire is sick. Come downstairs." My hand closed around the phone. There was no new medical update from Claire. No message through the emergency channel. Nothing from Mom saying Claire had taken a turn. Just Dad. Or someone using a number for him. The old instinct arrived instantly. Go down before this becomes embarrassing. Go down before somebody calls the police. Go down before coworkers learn what kind of daughter you are. That instinct had kept me obedient far more efficiently than any locked door ever could. Nina watched me. "Do you want to see him?" The question should not have felt revolutionary. It did. "No." My voice came out steadier than my hands. "Tell security to follow the procedure we already approved." Nina nodded. "Anything else?" No one argues with him about me. No one discusses Claire. No one explains the order beyond what they're authorized to say. "Got it." "And Nina?" She stopped. "If he leaves, let him leave. Nobody follows him." "Understood." She walked toward the elevators. I went back into the conference room. My chair was still pulled away from the table. My presentation was still frozen on a slide about community outreach. 6 people looked at me. "Sorry," I said. "Where were we?" My voice shook on the last word. So I picked up my pen before anyone could notice what my fingers were doing. We were discussing branch signage when another internal message appeared on my laptop. "Security response active. Please remain in admin suite." Nothing more. The restraint of that sentence helped. No adjectives. No speculation. Just instruction. I kept talking. 3 minutes later, a second message arrived. Subject entered staff-only corridor after verbal direction not to enter. Security contact made. My eyes stayed on the projected calendar. For almost 4 decades, Dad had taught me that a crisis erased procedure. Claire was sick. Therefore doors opened. Schedules changed. Money moved. Rachel came. The sentence on my screen said something different. A door had been marked staff only. He had been told not to cross it. He crossed it anyway. No amount of love changed what happened between those 3 facts. The meeting ended early because I could no longer pretend my attention was in the room. Nina returned 10 minutes later. "He's gone." "Did security remove him?" Security responded. Police were called because of the existing orders and the restricted area entry. What happened after that? I only know what I saw in the hallway and what security told me. I don't want to fill in blanks. That was why I trusted her. "What did you see?" 2 officers escorted him out from the administrative corridor. I didn't hear the whole conversation. Did he see you? Yes. Did he say anything? Nina looked uncomfortable. He asked me to tell you that Claire needed you. I waited. That's it? Not exactly. What else? He said. She always comes when Claire needs her. The sentence settled into the room. Not, she loves her sister. Not, please tell her I'm scared. She always comes. Prediction. Expectation. Access. The same mechanism Dad had described in the email months earlier. Once she sees how scared Claire is, Rachel won't say no. I opened my laptop. What are you doing? Nina asked. Writing down what you just told me before memory starts polishing it. You want me to send you my version too? Yes. Separately. Only what you directly saw and heard. She pulled out her phone. No conclusions. No conclusions. For once, I didn't need one. By late afternoon, Workplace Safety had produced an incident report. I read it alone. Dad entered the building through the public lobby. Reception declined to provide my location. He was informed that he could not enter administrative work areas. A staff member encountered him beyond the marked access point and directed him to return to the public area. He continued farther into the corridor before security arrived. The report listed the existing workplace notice. It listed the responding employees. It listed the officers who came after security contacted law enforcement. It did not call him controlling. It did not call me frightened. It did not mention kidneys. That made it one of the strongest documents in my file. The next morning, Victim Services called. The representative confirmed that the workplace incident had been referred to the prosecutor handling Dad's pending criminal matter because his release conditions already restricted contact with me and prohibited him from coming to my workplace. What happens to his bond? I asked. That decision belongs to the criminal court. Could he be arrested again? I can't promise what the judge or prosecutor will do. I can tell you the alleged violation has been documented and sent where it needs to go. For once, I did not ask for more. My job was not to manage Dad's criminal exposure. That belonged to a system outside me. My job was to decide what I needed. Elena met me that afternoon. The chronology between us had grown thicker, but its structure had become simpler. The same-day urgent care record, the police report, the first night calls, the criminal no-contact conditions, my written condo boundary, the donor emails, the temporary civil order, the workplace notice, the restricted area incident, Mom's warning from the night before, Dad's message telling me to come downstairs. Each item had existed before the next one. Nothing had been manufactured for court. Elena turned the workplace report over. This matters. Because he crossed the staff door? Because there were layers before he crossed it. I looked at her. He had already been told not to contact me. Yes. He had already been told not to come to work. Yes. Reception told him not to enter the staff area. Yes. And he still thought I'd come downstairs. Elena closed the folder. What do you want to do? That question again. Not what should happen to him. What do you want? I want the final hearing. You were already going to have one. I know. I don't want to negotiate it away. She studied my face. Okay. No private agreement where Dad promises to behave if I withdraw. Okay. No family exception that lets him contact me whenever Claire is admitted. Okay. If Claire has a genuine emergency, there can be one written channel. But he doesn't get to decide that emergency means he can show up wherever I am. Elena took out her legal pad. This is your order. Tell me the boundaries you want the court to consider. So I did. That evening, my condo felt different. Not safer because security had removed Dad. Not stronger because another report existed. Different because I had stayed upstairs. The moment had already happened. Dad came. I did not go to him. Nothing collapsed. Claire was still receiving care. The library still opened the next morning. My parents were still alive. The earth had not punished me for refusing to perform the ritual. I heated soup, sat at my kitchen table, and opened the ticket confirmation for the author event I had bought before Claire went into the hospital. It was scheduled for Friday. For several minutes I stared at the date. The full hearing was coming. The criminal matter was moving in the background. Claire was still sick. Mom was angry. Going to hear a novelist talk about a book suddenly seemed embarrassingly frivolous, which was exactly why I went. On Friday evening, I sat in the fourth row among strangers while somebody talked about fictional characters who kept mistaking obligation for destiny. At one point, the audience laughed. So did I. Nobody needed my insurance card. Nobody needed a ride home. Nobody asked me to translate a lab result. For 90 minutes, my phone stayed in my purse. I had spent years treating peace as an empty space waiting to be filled by somebody else's emergency. That night, peace was an actual event on my calendar. The full civil protection hearing took place the following week. Dad sat across the courtroom with an attorney. Mom was behind him. I did not look for Claire. If she was there, I did not need to use her face as a compass. Elena sat beside me, but the pages in front of us were mine. My dates. My sources. My words. The judge reviewed the temporary order and the incident history before asking questions. Dad's attorney began where I expected. His concern for a critically ill daughter. A household under stress. A disagreement over living donation. He did not deny that Dad had struck me. He framed the surrounding circumstances as emotional chaos inside a frightened household. My jaw tightened. Elena touched nothing. She did not whisper an answer into my ear. When it was my turn, the judge looked directly at me. Miss Mercer, tell me what you are asking the court to protect you from. The old Rachel would have started with childhood. Hospital corridors. Missed birthdays. Money. Claire. Mom. The healthy one carries what the sick one can't. I had enough history to talk until sunset. Instead, 4 facts sat on the page in front of me. My father has repeatedly acted as if a medical or family crisis gives him the right to override my decisions. Dad shifted in his seat. I continued. I never gave final consent to donate a kidney. The judge glanced at the exhibits. My father told other people I had agreed before my donor process reached the private consent stage. When I later said no, he struck me. That was documented the same day by urgent care and police. Dad's attorney rose slightly. We don't dispute that there was an incident. The judge raised a hand. Let her finish. My pulse beat in my injured lip even though the wound had healed weeks ago. After that, criminal release conditions restricted his contact with me. I also obtained temporary civil protection. My employer formally notified him not to seek me inside restricted administrative areas. Last week, he entered my workplace, was denied information about my location, was told not to enter the employee area, crossed a marked staff-only boundary anyway, and continued after being directed back. Dad spoke before his attorney could stop him. Because Claire was in the hospital. The room changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. I looked at him. There it was. The reason he believed should erase everything else. The judge turned toward him. Mr. Mercer, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Dad sat back. When my turn resumed, the judge asked, Do you believe he intended to harm you at the library? I don't know what he intended. That answer seemed to surprise Dad more than an accusation would have. I know what he did. The judge waited. He crossed a boundary after being told it existed. Dad's attorney later argued that his client was a father under extraordinary emotional pressure. When Dad was permitted to speak, his voice rose. My daughter is sick. He meant Claire. He always meant Claire. I've spent my life doing everything I could to keep her alive. Rachel knows that. She knows what we've been through. His attorney put a hand lightly near his elbow. Dad kept talking. She is healthy. She has a good job. She has her own place. We asked her for one thing. One thing. My kidney apparently weighed less in his sentence than the groceries I had bought last week. The judge asked him about the workplace. I was trying to talk to my daughter. You had been told not to contact her. My other daughter was in the hospital. You had been told not to go to her workplace. I wasn't going there to hurt anybody. You entered a restricted area. I needed Rachel to listen. The words hit me with almost no force. That surprised me. Months earlier, I would have heard desperation, love, fear. A father losing control because one child was sick and the other was difficult. Now I heard the structure. I needed Rachel. Therefore, Rachel should have been available. The judge turned back to me. Miss Mercer, do you want any direct contact from your father? No. Any exception for family emergencies? My mouth went dry. Dad stared at me. Mom's hands were clasped tightly in her lap behind him. A picture flashed through my mind. Claire in another hospital bed. Mom calling. Dad unable to reach me. The old guilt pressed against my ribs. Then I remembered what I had already built. One designated written route. Claire could contact me herself. Mom could send verified emergency information through the permitted channel. Emergency did not require Dad's access. No direct contact exception, I said. If there is a genuine medical emergency involving my sister, information can be sent through the designated written channel. I will decide what I do with it. Dad's face hardened. For the first time, that did not feel like a verdict on me. The final order came later that day. 2 years. No direct contact from Dad. No visits to my home. No appearances at my workplace for the purpose of seeking me. No third-party messages designed to evade the restriction. Necessary legal communication through appropriate channels. Emergency information about Claire through the designated written route. It did not decide every issue between us. It did not settle medical expenses from the assault. It did not resolve the false statements Dad had distributed. Those civil matters could continue separately. But the central question had an answer. Dad no longer got to decide when he had access to me. Outside the courthouse, Mom caught up before I reached the sidewalk. She was allowed to speak to me. I stopped because I chose to. Her face looked older than it had 6 weeks earlier. Are you happy now? No. The answer seemed to throw her. Your father could have his bond changed because of what happened at the library. That isn't my decision. You filed all of this. I reported what happened. She shook her head. We're already short every month. Claire has copays, transportation, parking, things Medicare doesn't magically erase. Your father has legal expenses now. Do you understand what this is doing? Yes. Then who is going to help us? There it was. Not, are you okay? Not, does your lip still hurt? Not, did we lose you? Who is going to help us? For years, those sentences had sounded interchangeable. They weren't. I don't know, I said. Mom stared at me. That's it? That's your household question, not mine. Her expression changed. I didn't try to name it. I walked away before she could hand it back to me. Claire messaged that evening. I heard about the order. No accusation. No congratulations. I waited. A second message appeared. I still don't understand how you can do this to Dad and still say you love me. My thumb hovered above the keyboard. 6 paragraphs assembled themselves automatically. Dad hit me. Dad lead. Dad crossed the order. You knew the surgery date wasn't real. I have paid for years. I have shown up for everything. The whole defense brief lived inside me, polished by decades of practice. I deleted it. Then I wrote, you don't have to understand my boundaries for them to be real. The typing indicator appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Her reply took several minutes. So what does that mean for us? That question was harder. Dad had made his relationship with me conditional on access. I did not want to reproduce that by demanding Claire agree with every choice before I would speak to her. But I also would not return to a sisterhood where every conversation eventually became a negotiation over my body. It means you can contact me directly as my sister. Not through Mom or Dad. Not about changing my donor decision. If the conversation becomes pressure about my kidney, I will end it. Her answer came quickly. That's harsh. Maybe. I looked at the word for a while, then typed. It's clear. No reply followed. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. For a moment, I expected the familiar panic. Who called? Who needed something? What had happened overnight? The phone was still on the nightstand. No missed calls. No emergency messages. No new instructions from anyone. The quiet felt enormous. Months earlier, silence from my parents would have terrified me. Now it sounded like a door staying closed because I had finally stopped holding it open. The quiet did not turn into peace all at once. For the first few weeks after the final protection order, it felt more like waiting for an alarm that had been disconnected without my nervous system getting the message. I still checked my phone when I woke. Still looked through the peephole before opening my condo door. Still caught myself listening for footsteps in the administrative hallway whenever the elevator opened at work. But Dad did not call. He did not appear at my building. He did not come back to the library. Whatever happened with his criminal case after the workplace incident arrived to me only through official notices and victim services updates. I learned that his release conditions remained in place while the case moved forward. I did not call the prosecutor for extra details. I did not ask Elena to predict what would happen. For the first time in my life, a problem involving my father existed without becoming my assignment. That took practice. So did keeping my money. The second month after I stopped the transfers, Mom sent me a spreadsheet. Of course she did. The attachment was named Mercer Household Shortfall. I almost laughed. Almost. Mom had done bookkeeping for too many years to send vague panic when numbers could do the work more efficiently. The sheet was clean. Mortgage gap, auto insurance, gas, cell service, parking for Claire's appointments, grocery delivery, a reserve for Claire's copays and other out-of-pocket medical expenses. Every line had a monthly amount beside it. At the bottom, Mom had highlighted a total. Then she wrote, "This is what your decision is doing." I thought seeing the actual numbers might help you understand that this isn't about restaurants or luxuries. For several minutes, I studied the sheet. Some of the numbers were legitimate. That was what made it effective. Claire still had medical costs. Her private insurance did not make every appointment free, and her treatment expenses did not disappear because other coverage coordinated with it. Gas still cost money. Parking still cost money. The house still had a mortgage. None of that transformed the deficit into mine. Mom sent another message before I answered. "You could fix most of this by putting the 600 back. One line, Rachel, that's all." One line. My entire childhood reduced to a bookkeeping entry. I opened the county property website. My parents had owned their house for decades. Even with the remaining mortgage, the public property information, and the numbers Mom herself had shared over the years made one thing obvious. They had options. Options were not the same as comfort. That distinction had apparently been my job to erase. My reply took less than 5 minutes. "I understand the shortfall. I am not resuming the monthly transfer." Then I added a link to a local real estate agency's downsizing and home valuation page. If the current housing cost no longer fits your retirement income, selling and moving to a smaller property is one available option. The cursor blinked. Old Rachel would have added 3 paragraphs. "I know moving would be hard. I know Claire needs stability. I know Dad loves the yard. I know you have memories there." The new version of me deleted every sentence that tried to solve the emotion created by their own choices. I sent the email. Mom's answer came 12 minutes later. "So after everything, your solution is to make us sell our home." I read the sentence once, then closed the message. My solution was not to make them do anything. That was the part she still could not hear. A week later, Claire called. Directly. No message from Mom first. No relative telling me she was upset. Just my sister's name on the screen. I answered. "Hi." "Hey." Her voice sounded stronger than it had during the hospitalization. "How are you feeling?" "Better than that week." "That's good." A pause followed. I let it exist. Claire spoke first. "I'm still doing the evaluation process." "For transplant?" "Yes." "Okay, there are other pathways they're looking at." She did not explain all of them, and I did not ask for details that were hers to keep. That felt new too. For most of our lives, Claire's health had been treated like a family bulletin board. Everyone knew everything because crisis supposedly made privacy impractical. Now she could tell me as much or as little as she wanted. "So," she said, "I guess you're not going to ask if they found another living donor." "No." "Why not?" "Because, if you want me to know, you'll tell me." Another pause. "That's weird." "What is?" "You not managing it." The sentence was so accurate that I smiled. My lip no longer hurt when I did. "I'm trying something new." Claire gave a small, humorless laugh. "Apparently." Then, her voice changed. "I miss you." The words found a place in me I had been trying not to touch. "I miss you too." "I'm still angry." "I know. I still think you could help me." There it was. Not hidden. Not wrapped in Mom's language. Claire's own belief. My fingers tightened around the phone, but I did not end the call. "You're allowed to think that. You make it sound so simple." "It isn't simple." Then why does everything you say sound final? Because for the first time, it was. Instead, I said, because I've spent too much of my life making final decisions sound temporary so nobody would be upset with me. Claire did not answer immediately. Then she asked, if I never agree with you, can we still be sisters? I looked out my kitchen window. A woman in the building across from mine was watering 2 plants on her balcony. Somewhere below, a car door closed. Ordinary sounds. I don't know what will be, I said. But disagreement isn't the part that makes a relationship impossible. What is? Treating my no like the beginning of another negotiation. Her breathing came through the speaker. I don't know if I can promise I'll never wish you'd change your mind. I'm not asking you to. What are you asking? That you don't make changing my mind the price of talking to you. That was the closest thing to hope I could offer. Claire said, I can try. Not apologize. Not transform. Try. For now, that was more honest than a reunion. The civil case moved much more slowly than the protection order had. That was fine. The protection order was already in place. Dad could not use settlement negotiations as a waiting room where my safety remained undecided. Months passed, while attorneys exchanged documents about the smaller issues left behind by the assault and the false donor story, urgent care costs, some legal expenses, the limited group of people and organizations who had received Dad's false claim that I had committed to donate and then abandoned Claire. Elena sent me a proposed correction one afternoon. I read the first sentence twice, then called her. This says I was unable to proceed with donation. Yes, that's not accurate. It avoids unnecessary detail. It creates a new, inaccurate version. Elena was quiet for a moment. What wording do you want? My answer was already on my screen. Rachel Mercer had not given final consent to become a living kidney donor. Prior statements saying that she had agreed to donate or withdrew from a scheduled donation were incorrect. Elena read it back. That's tighter. It's true. Do you want the reason you declined included? No. Good. My private medical decision doesn't become public property just because Dad lied about it. The final settlement was not dramatic. No courtroom applause. No massive check. No confession from Dad. He agreed, through counsel, to reimburse defined medical costs and a portion of expenses associated with resolving the dispute. The correction went only to the specific recipients whose original emails I had preserved. The settlement did not alter the protection order. That mattered enough that I read the clause 3 times. Dad's attorney also included language saying the agreement did not constitute an admission beyond the terms stated. Years earlier, that would have bothered me. I would have wanted the document to say what he had done to me in moral language. Wrong. Controlling. Abusive. Unforgivable. Now the facts seemed sufficient. He had hit me. He had spoken in my name. He had ignored boundaries. He had crossed a staff-only door after being told not to. He had lost direct access to me. A paragraph declaring his inner character would not improve any of those facts. Before I signed, Elena asked, do you want me to convey any personal message with the final paperwork? No. You're sure? Yes. There was nothing left to explain that I had not already spent a lifetime explaining. After the settlement was signed, nothing spectacular happened. That was one of the best parts. My paycheck arrived. The old $600 transfer did not leave. Another paycheck arrived. Same thing. My retirement contribution rose. My emergency fund grew. I took 3 days of vacation without checking whether Claire had appointments first. For most people, 3 days off would not have qualified as a life event. For me, the first morning was almost unbearable. No schedule. No medical parking garage. No text asking me to compare insurance statements. At 11, I caught myself opening my email just to see whether someone needed something. Then I closed the laptop and walked outside. The leaves were turning. I spent 40 minutes in a used bookstore and bought a novel because I liked the first page. Not because it would help someone. Not because it was a gift. Not because I could justify the price. Because I wanted it. Back at work, the scar on my lip had faded to a thin mark I could only see if I leaned close to a mirror. My voice had been normal for months. The first week after Dad hit me, every long meeting had made the cut ache. Now I could stand in front of a room, answer reporters' questions, correct bad information, and leave without tasting blood. One afternoon after a briefing, Nina walked beside me toward the elevators. "You know what's weird?" she asked. "What?" "You stopped apologizing before correcting people." I looked at her. "I used to do that? All the time." "No, I didn't." Nina grinned. "You absolutely did." The elevator doors opened. Maybe she was right. At work, the apology had sounded professional. "Sorry, just one correction." "Sorry, I want to make sure we're using the latest language." "Sorry, before we send this." Tiny permissions before speaking precisely. I stepped inside. The next morning, I corrected a date in a public notice without apologizing first. Nobody died. About 8 months after the slap, Mom contacted me through the channel she was still permitted to use. The subject line was DAD Thursday. Inside, she wrote, "Your father has a cardiology follow-up Thursday afternoon. Nothing dramatic, but they want him to bring his medication list and insurance paperwork. He wants you there." I read the message carefully. No emergency. No claim that Dad could not attend without me. Just an appointment and an old expectation. My answer was short. "You'll need to arrange that yourselves." Mom responded almost immediately. "Rachel, you know how to handle all this." I stared at the sentence. There were days when insight arrived like revelation. This was not one of them. This arrived like recognition. Of course I knew how to handle it. I knew how to organize medications. I knew how to read insurance letters. I knew how to build a question list before an appointment and take notes afterward. I knew which documents Dad always forgot. I knew Mom would become flustered if a doctor used too many unfamiliar terms. I knew how to make difficult systems easier for other people. That had never been the problem. The problem was that everyone had mistaken ability for obligation. Mom sent another message. "Whatever you think of him, he is still your father." My hands rested on the keyboard. The old response arrived first. "I know. I'm sorry. I just can't this time." Then I deleted it. "I'm not available." Send. 2 words and a contraction. New argument. No accounting. No reference to court. No reminder of the slap. Mom could dislike the answer without gaining another version of it. Afterward, sadness came, not triumph. That surprised me less than it would have months earlier. Dad was still my father. There was a version of Thursday afternoon in which I sat beside him in a cardiologist's office, corrected his medication list, drove him home, and stopped for coffee because he hated hospital coffee. That version of my life had contained real moments too. Not every memory was a lie. That was part of what made leaving the role painful. A boundary did not require me to rewrite every good day into something ugly. It only required me to stop using good days as payment for future access. Claire called a few weeks later. We had begun talking maybe twice a month, sometimes only for 10 minutes. She told me about a book she hated. I told her about a patron who had returned a library book nearly 30 years late with an apology letter. Neither of us mentioned kidneys. Then one evening she said, "I had another transplant appointment today." My body tightened automatically. "Okay. They're still evaluating options." "Okay. That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." Neither did I. So we sat in the awkwardness. Then Claire said, "I'm trying not to make every conversation about this." "I know. You can tell?" "Yes." "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "A little." She laughed. A real laugh this time. For perhaps 30 seconds, she was simply my older sister. Not my patient. Not the person I had been born to help. Not the reason Dad hit me. Just Claire. When the call ended, I did not mistake 30 good seconds for complete repair. But I let them be good. Near the end of the year, I finally reorganized the file box in my bedroom closet. Insurance, taxes, condo documents, medical records. The envelope with the childhood hospital bracelet was still there. Rachel Mercier. My own handwriting across the front. I sat on the floor and opened it. The plastic had yellowed more than I remembered. My childhood name was faint but readable. For years, Mom had treated that bracelet like a family relic. Proof that we survived. Proof that I had saved Claire. Proof that sacrifice made us close. I turned it over between my fingers. There was another truth. That hospital visit had happened to me too. My fear had happened. My body had happened. My childhood had happened. I did not need to throw the bracelet away to stop belonging to its old meaning. So, I placed it inside my medical record folder. My folder. Then I closed the box. Almost a year after Dad hit me, I sat in the waiting room for a routine physical. My physical. Not donor testing. Not Claire's appointment. Not a consultation someone had asked me to attend because I was good with paperwork. A nurse called my name and handed me a tablet. Just review everything before we take you back. Most of it was ordinary. Address, insurance, medications, allergies. Then I reached the emergency contact section. Martin Mercer. The name sat there, exactly where it had been the night I went to urgent care with blood on my lip. For a moment, my finger stopped above the screen. I remembered that first night. The hesitation, how impossible deleting his name had felt, even after he struck me. As if emergency contact were not a form field but a declaration of loyalty. As if removing him would make the break real. Maybe that was why I had left it untouched then. I had needed almost a year to understand something simpler. Emergency contact was not an award for blood relation. It was access granted by me. I tapped remove. The line disappeared. A new field opened. Name: Nina Patel. Relationship: I selected friend. Then I reviewed the page again. At the top was my name. Rachel Mercer. No reference to Claire. No donor status. No note saying, healthy one. No explanation of whose daughter I was. Just my name on my record. The nurse returned a minute later and glanced at the completed screen. Anything else you need changed? I handed her the tablet. No, I said. That's everything.